Hi, everyone. It's Lindsay with High Altitude Astrology, and I'm back bringing you another astrology video. It's been a while, and I've been on many adventures since I've last posted, but I'm back and ready to bring you some more chart readings. And today I thought I would start with the chart of Donald Trump since he is in the limelight once again, but this time it feels a little different, and I will explain why. Um, Different meaning perhaps something's actually going to shift for him. So I have the chart of Donald Trump up on the screen here, and as you can see, uh, he is a Gemini sun, and he's got Uranus near that sun at 17 degrees with the north node squeezed in between there. And actually, I want to start there because what that means is that his south node, which is directly across from the north node, is at 20 degrees of Sagittarius. And I just quickly Googled south node in Sagittarius, and north node in Gemini is actually what I Googled. And what came up to have your north node in Gemini. Now, the north node is more about karma and lifetimes that perhaps we've lived and will live. So the north node has to do with where we're headed in this lifetime, and the south node generally has to do with where we've come from. Now, it can mean that the south node brings us certain gifts that we've mastered or certain ways of being because we've come from lifetimes of having focused on that energy. And then the north node has to do with where we need to learn and open up more to in this lifetime. Well, to have the north node in Gemini and the south node in Sag, just this little title here: the Gemini North Node reveals a soul that has spent many incarnations as a wild, self-righteous, and unrestricted entity, traveling the physical and spiritual planes on its own terms. So that's where he's come from. And you can certainly see that in his expression. You know, he's just so um, blunt and, really kind of a know-it-all at times. In fact, I think one of his latest tweets, he said something about like, and I don't know if he was joking or was serious, or maybe there was a little bit of both involved, but he said something about like my unchallengeable knowledge or something like that in his tweet. I mean, it was just so over the top. So anyway, that is his south node in Sag. But in this lifetime, he's definitely learning more about kind of dealing with people on a day-to-day basis. Gemini is a lot about gathering of facts and communicating of information, and it's like the image Gemini of the butterfly moving from flower to flower, collecting pollen and disseminating pollen. So it's more kind of about the smaller thinking mind in a way, not in a negative way, smaller, but just about facts and details, not so much about large, grand, big picture ideas. So he's needing to kind of learn how to sort of work within that realm of life rather than this other larger, bigger, expanded perspective way of thinking, which potentially can be a challenge for him, I would think, because look, what's right next to that north node is Uranus in Gemini, and that's like this wild card energy, this coyote trickster energy, this energy of shock and of change, so it's interesting to have this little stellium that he's got up here with the sun, the north node, and Uranus, because it indicates, and all in Gemini, that through his spoken word, he is here to really like challenge and to really be this kind of shocking energy. But you can also see that it's, you know, of course, opposite that south node in Sag. And so it's kind of like, you know, he's got to learn in some ways how to kind of temper this grandiose, you know, part of him that thinks he knows it all, and, you know, maybe even, you know, has come from lifetimes where he's had a lot of the information, and now it's about really sort of distilling it and expressing it in a more kind of, in some ways grounded, but just in a more like particular way, not so like big ideas, grand ideas. Now, what I really want to talk about with his chart is these transits that are coming up, because this is what I think is going to be creating some of the change and disruption that he's going to face. If you look here, Pluto transiting, that's what that red indicates, is at 20 degrees of Capricorn right now. And it just went direct at the beginning of October. And it has been creating an opposition, which is a 180-degree angle to his Saturn in his chart, since basically March of this year. That's when it started. It came within a degree of opposition of his Saturn in March. Then in April, late April, Pluto went retrograde. Then, like I mentioned, in October, it went direct. And coming up here in February, the 13th of 2020, Pluto's going to go exactly opposite of Saturn. Now, this is a very significant transit for a few reasons. First of all, Pluto moves very slowly in the sky. So the fact that it's actually in an opposition to a planet, a personal planet in the chart, is unusual. And it's something he will never experience again in his lifetime. Now, what oppositions do is they bring a tension between usually us and the other, because that's what oppositions are all about. They're about our relationships with others. And what it is really, it's our own energy that's projected outside of ourselves into our relationships with other people. So we often experience others' oppositions through our relationships with others. Now, who will he be experiencing this with? Well, if we think about it, it's going to be experienced with some kind of people of authority, because that's what Saturn has to deal with. Saturn rules the sign of Capricorn. Saturn deals with authority. It deals with the principles of contraction, limitation, discipline, creating structure, foundation, boundaries. So that's part of this oppositional energy. Now, the other part of it is Pluto, transiting Pluto. And that has a lot to do with the energy of death and transformation, of going into our subconscious and our unconscious, and you know, looking at what's there. Even if we don't consciously do it, it often kind of comes up to the surface, seeps through, allowing us to kind of see if we can bring conscious awareness to situations where we may be being motivated by unconscious desires or unconscious forces, and allowing us the opportunity to kind of, you know, siphon through all of that and really find, you know, possibly our gifts in the process, our gifts that are hidden in the unconscious, but also helping us to eliminate and let go and transform in what you might call our shadow material, or what, you know, unconsciously operates that may be really working against us because we're not aware of it. So what I see with this Pluto opposite Saturn And the other thing I didn't mention was that uh, because Pluto is in the sign of Capricorn, again, Saturn rules Capricorn, but Capricorn has to deal with the structures of government and the structures of our political system, things that create the foundations in our society. So really, what I see happening here with this Pluto opposite his Saturn is on an inward level, it's actually going to kind of break down his personal kind of foundation and really perhaps allow him to really see, if he chooses, how maybe some of these ways that he's built foundation in his life might be needing to change, especially stuff from the past, because his Saturn's in Cancer, and that's all about our past and our home and where we've come from and our environment growing up. Saturn's a lot about our father too, and to have Saturn and Venus next to each other, Venus is our capacity to feel love and to feel to feel good, to feel loved. And to have Saturn there indicates that potentially, he had a challenging relationship with the father. He didn't get the love he wanted from a father. There's something about having Saturn next to Venus that restricts the loving energy. And maybe, he didn't get the acknowledgement from his father that he needed, and it left him wounded. It left him feeling unlovable, and then that carries forward into our lives. So with this Pluto opposite this energy here, it's like he's really going to be having an opportunity to kind of see where some of those things from the past might be driving his behavior. But what really is the way it's gonna happen from the outside is he's going to be met with a lot of resistance from the government, essentially, from people in power. He's just not gonna be able to, get his way, and in fact, may really go through an actual, metaphorical, death in some way of the actual structures in his own life. And I wanted to share just a little bit about transiting Saturn. That's actually transiting Pluto opposite Saturn. Actually, I would rather read from Planets in Transit by Robert Hand. And he talks about Pluto opposite Saturn. He said, you will experience changing circumstances and situations that may force you to surrender many things. Material goods, relationships, principles. Those are all, material goods deals with Saturn, relationships deals with the opposition, principles also Saturn, that you have previously held on to. You will probably resist these losses, which is how you will experience them, with great tenacity and stubbornness. You will need great discipline under this transit because you may not have any resources to waste, and you may be forced to do as much as possible with very little. Feelings are often suppressed, as if facing the reality of your present conditions does not permit you the luxury of indulging in emotions. However, this is more apparent than real. You may confuse hard-heartedness with hard-headedness and suppress feelings for what you consider to be practical reasons. Even if your situation becomes very difficult, you should keep your heart open to others, or you will bear the scars of this period for the rest of your life as a loss of humanity. You may feel that you've worked very hard and that nothing ever comes of it. That is true in that the kind of overt success that everyone can clearly recognize is not likely to come now. Your life is in a state of change and your circumstances are not stable enough to bring anything to the kind of culmination that constitutes success. But you are laying a foundation for future success. Your inner structure as a human being is changing. And it is the profound insecurity of such a transformation that is making you hold on to the past so furiously and with such a sense of effort. When this period's over, your life course may be considerably changed. The only reason you aren't getting anywhere now is that there isn't anywhere for you to go in that direction. Remember, the truth works. If it doesn't work for you, it isn't true for you. This may be the most important lesson that you can learn at this time. Like I said, because Pluto's in the sign of Capricorn, opposing his Saturn in Cancer, I mean, I think he's really kind of a beacon for this energy of patriarchy that's also changing right now, because that's part of Pluto in Capricorn, is that the male energy in all of us is going through a tremendous transformation. And you can see it reflected in society, in a lot of the things that are occurring, like the Me Too movement, and just a lot of people in corruption getting exposed, not only in politics but in relationships between men and women, and he's kind of like, the beacon of this energy, the way that he expresses himself with just such blatant kind of lack of consideration for others. It's just a very kind of might makes right type of attitude that he takes about things. And I think part of this transiting Pluto opposite Saturn too is kind of creating an opportunity for him to really sort of go through some type of change. And this is going to culminate also with Saturn and Pluto conjuncting by transit in January of 2020. So Saturn's going to catch up to Pluto at around 22 degrees, excuse me. And that's going to be on the 12th of January. And again, that's going to be within a degree of opposition to his Saturn. And Saturn Pluto is really, affecting, again, a lot of this change that we're seeing. I think it's helping us as a society kind of face change better and really go through this because Pluto's all about death and transformation, and Saturn's all about effort and work. So we're really being asked to work at transformation at this time. And again, that energy of Pluto and Saturn is opposing his Saturn, how he creates foundation, how he creates stability and structure in his life. So it's just totally changing him. And I think it's going to be very difficult for him to go through this time without, getting some feedback through his relationships and through the collective that's really going to kind of break him down, and so there's more to be seen, obviously, but I think January is going to be a very big time for that. We will see something is what I believe is going to happen. And the other thing that's going on is that this full moon is going to be at 20 degrees of Aries. This is on the 13th. And the full moon is going to be right here in his chart. And it's going to be, interestingly, trining his moon at 21 degrees of Sag. But it's also going to be squaring that Saturn. And what's interesting about this full moon is that Pluto is going to be squaring it exactly. So for him to have the full moon, and it's going to be just on his 9th house cusp, like I said, trining his moon, but squaring his Saturn, and Pluto is going to be squaring that full moon. It feels like perhaps because the moon is going to be trining his moon in Sag, it could be a positive result for him, where he's really feeling very confident and very assertive. But his natal moon he's a full moon birth, opposes the sun, North Node, and Uranus in Gemini. And, to have your sun opposite moon just creates for a very kind of volatile, emotional situation, because your solar energy, your light, is opposing your lunar energy, which has to do with your emotional expression. And so that moon trining, the full moon trining his natal moon, is going to set off that sun North Node Uranus in Gemini stellium there. So it's really going to create some basically more unpredictable behavior in him, for one thing. But with, again, the Pluto transiting and the full moon squaring that Pluto, I mean, that is asking for change. That is asking us to really go through some sort of transformation. So it's just kind of a mixed bag, this full moon, but I do think it's going to be, obviously setting off that Pluto opposite his Saturn energy. And I think there's going to actually be more upheaval for him around this full moon time on the 13th of October. And we will see. Let's see, what else is happening for him in his chart? Well, he did just have what's called a progressed new moon. And this has to do with the progressed sun and moon being at the same degree. And if you look down here, you can see they're at 13 degrees of Virgo. So to have a progressed new moon is a beginning time. New moons are always beginning times. And so it's also kind of a rare experience. And it's in the sign of Virgo, and Virgo is about humility, and Virgo is about really understanding the facts and details of things, and having sort of like a disciplined, focused mind in looking into things, and it's really about service. And I would think that this new moon in Virgo, especially in his first house of how he brings himself out into the world, progressed new moon in Virgo, is helping him or asking him to really, in some ways, bring himself out into the world in a different way than perhaps he's used to. This is asking him to sort of humble himself and to, be more fact-oriented, and to express himself in a way of being of service. These are all ways, and of course this is a long-term energy. So, but it's the beginning of it. And so he's really sort of being asked to move out into the world in some ways, like in a new way, in a more humble way, in a way of being more of service to people. So that's another energy that exists right now in his chart for him. We'll see if he continues to sort of grow in that direction. And finally, I want to mention he's also having and I did mention the Saturn-Pluto conjunction happening at the beginning of January, opposing his natal Saturn. But also what I wanted to mention in that process is that around the 14th of January, Saturn is going to be, actually it's a little bit later than the 14th, 2349. It's actually around the 21st of January. He is going to be having transiting Saturn right here, opposing that natal Saturn. And again, this happens once every 30 years, so a rare transit, and it's really saying, like, it's time to and let go of things. I mean, if things are going to happen with impeachment or anything like that, this is going to be the time. It's going to be in the month of January. And, you know, to have your natal Saturn opposite Saturn, let me read from Robert Hand. He says, in your work, you may reach a peak of success, which will be accompanied by increased responsibility. In that case, you will work extremely hard, but very successfully. On the other hand, you may receive abundant evidence that you are working in the wrong area altogether. This would manifest by extreme difficulties in your work situation, such as finding your efforts blocked by coworkers or superiors. If your superiors disapprove of your performance, you should completely reevaluate your work, etc. So, you know, so this is a culmination. It's like having a full moon, the opposition. So it's a culmination time, and we will see what happens for him in this month of January, because if things are going to shift, it really does look like with that Pluto and Saturn opposite his natal Saturn, that will be the time. Yeah, I think that's everything I want to say at the moment about his chart. Um, you know, there's always things to look at in a chart, but for now, I think I'll leave you with that. And just want to say thank you for watching. If you like this video, please subscribe. And I look forward to doing another chart reading for you all very soon. Take care.